Today at the National Press Club, Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, Amanda Rishworth. She'll outline how the government plans to reform employment services across the country to create an effective and dignified system. Amanda Rishworth with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club and today's Westpac address here in Canberra. I'm Greg Jennett, a board director here at the club and also an ABC journalist. Now, I think it's fair to say that the national economy is in something of a precarious state at the moment, with high inflation, interest rates to match them, and probably slowing economic activity. We'll have to wait and see about that. Added to that, an unemployment rate that is ticking slightly upwards, now into the mid 4% range. So if those trends continued, may well be the case that we end up with more than 690,000 Australians out of work but wanting a job. So employment services can help direct a jobless worker towards an employer, and it's arguably one of the more important responsibilities of a government to provide those services. To that end, the Employment and Workplace Relations Minister, Amanda Rishworth, is our guest today. We had a sense in the budget, if you read it closely, that some form of change was coming in this area, but the Minister will today fill out the missing pieces that weren't actually specified in the budget papers earlier this month about a system that would begin in, we anticipate, but I'm sure the Minister can clarify, the middle of 2028. Now, by way of background, I don't think Amanda Rishworth needs much of an introduction in this room. She should be familiar to most of us by now. This is her second appearance here at the club. She's been Employment Minister since the election in May of last year. Previously, she's had responsibilities for the NDIS and was Social Services Minister in the Albanese government's first term. She's been in Parliament, forgive me for reminding you, Amanda, for the best part of 19 years now as the member for the Adelaide-based seat of Kingston. So as we always do, we'll hear the Minister's presentation. We'll have questions from our colleagues afterwards. And members are reminded that a podcast of today's event will be available on our website later today. So that's it for the introduction. Now, please welcome Amanda Rishworth with today's Westpac National Press Club address.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet today. And I pay my respect to elders past and present. And I do extend that acknowledgement to other First Nations people joining us here today and also around the country. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleague, Senator Don Farrell, a very good friend, and also the Secretary of my department, Simon Duggan, who's also here with us today. I did want to acknowledge representatives from employment service providers that join us and community organisations, but I also importantly wanted to acknowledge those in the room who have lived experience of our employment service system, because many of you will understand all too well how our current system is letting people fall through the cracks. Today, I'd like to outline the Albanese Labor government's vision for the future of our employment service system. These are once-in-a-generation reforms that will create a more responsive, effective and importantly dignified system. A system that helps more Australians into jobs, and a system that delivers better outcomes and better value for money for the Commonwealth. But first, I want to start by talking about why helping people into suitable, meaningful employment is so important. The dignity of work is a foundational value of Labor governments. Work delivers obvious benefits, providing economic security, but work also can provide confidence, connection and community. To have a job can help give people purpose, And as Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations, my job is to make sure as many Australians as possible share the benefits of work. Now, under the Albanese Labor government, we've seen the lowest average unemployment rate of any government in the last 50 years, and the creation of over 1.2 million jobs. We're seeing more people than ever engaged in the labour market, with participation rates remaining high by historical standards. But as the 2023 White Paper on Jobs and Employment highlighted, low unemployment does not mean that everyone can easily access work. There are still too many Australians missing out on the benefits of work because of barriers to their participation in the labour market. Some of these Australians might have gaps in their employment history. Perhaps they've taken time out for caring responsibilities or health issues. They might face discrimination because of age or disability. They might have limited digital literacy. They might have been suddenly retrenched after decades in the same job, shut out of the labour market because of a skills gap. Or they might just simply lack the confidence to get started in finding employment. All these factors, among others, can determine how far someone is from entering or re-entering the labour market. But if we believe in the opportunity and the dignity of work, it is critical there is support for people to address these barriers so they can get into work. The government has, of course, several policy levers to do this, including our skills and training system. But for many people, the pathway to employment is difficult to navigate on their own. And this is where our employment services system plays an absolutely vital role. At an individual level, the system has one objective: to place people in a suitable, meaningful job. But it must do more than just job matching. A well-functioning employment service system must also be able to provide the right assistance to job seekers at the right time. And, of course, considering their distance from the labour market. From brief interventions all the way through to intensive supports that help people overcome their barriers and prepare and connect them into work. And, of course, on a broader level, a good employment services system helps economic growth by lifting participation and reducing friction in the labour market. Now, I have visited more than 20 employment service providers since becoming Minister and spoken to many job seekers using our employment services system. And where services are working well, job seekers feel like they have someone that has their back and is walking alongside them. Like Jason. Jason came to his employment service provider after more than 5 years out of work. He'd been going through a really tough time in his personal life and had complex barriers which were stopping him from securing a job. He had developed significant anxiety and self-doubt because of repeated rejections from employers. He felt like he was never going to get another long-term job and had no idea how to even start trying to find one. Jason's provider took a personalised approach to building his confidence through coaching and support. They also helped him obtain a forklift licence, recognising a clear demand for these skills among businesses in Jason's local area. His provider connected him with one of these local businesses who offered Jason a casual job. And with ongoing encouragement and support from his provider, he was able to do well in this job. After 6 months, a casual job turned into a full-time job and a promotion. Jason's story shows why government investment in employment services to help job seekers overcome barriers to find suitable jobs is critical. The Commonwealth recognises the importance of this investment for over 80 years ago, when the Curtin government established the Commonwealth Employment Service, or commonly known as the CES. That was established in 1946 as a centralised labour exchange. The need for such a service had been outlined in the previous year in Australia's first ever employment white paper, in recognition of the fact that achieving full employment required an active role for government in connecting people to work. And for people who were job ready, the CES worked. But because it was focused on job matching, it didn't have enough support for people who were furthest from the labour market and needed additional help. The Keating government took steps to complement the CES with third-party providers in an attempt to deliver this more personalised support. The Howard government, of course, went one step further by abolishing the CES in 1998 and contracting out all employment services to providers. Now, the employment service system has had several names since then. First Job Network, then Job Services Australia, then Job Active. But each iteration was ineffective in calibrating the intensity of support to the needs of participants so that they could achieve employment. And we still see these issues today in Workforce Australia, designed by the former Liberal government and rolled out in 2022. Because at its core, Workforce Australia shares the same fundamental flaw as every other version, and that is a one-size-fits-all approach to supporting job seekers who are at different distances from the labour market. And that means not enough people are getting outcomes like Jason. Now, the Commonwealth spends around $2 billion each year on our employment services system. But as the Albanese Labor government's 2023 white paper highlighted, the system is ill-equipped to respond to the diverse needs of over 1 million Australians who access this service each year. These concerns were echoed in the final report by the House Select Committee on Workforce Australia Employment Services in 2023, drawing on evidence from hundreds of submissions and witnesses. That report found that a one-size-fits-all approach across all elements of Workforce Australia is letting too many participants fall through the cracks and creating inefficiencies in the system. Under Workforce Australia, most participants access support through third-party employment service providers. These providers should be delivering flexible, personalised support. But the overwhelming evidence shows us that for too many people, this is simply not the case. Because the one-size-fits-all approach to servicing and provider incentive payments cannot deliver the right intensity of support to all job seekers on the caseload. And equally, the standardised approach to mutual obligations is not as effective as it could be, helping job seekers actually get into work. If you're lucky enough to be healthy with a recent work history and a post-secondary qualification, you are closer to the labour market, and therefore a provider is more likely to be able to help you find a suitable job. Because the way providers are paid means they are incentivised to focus their efforts on those who fit this narrow profile, rather than supporting everyone on their caseload. And people with more complex barriers to employment simply get put in the too hard basket, what's known in the system commonly as parking. 20% of the Workforce Australia caseload has been stuck in the system for over 5 years. This figure is just too high. Meanwhile, job seekers that don't need the level of support offered by a provider often get funnelled into Workforce Australia Online. Created by the Morrison government, this online platform was pitched as a more cost-effective way to support job seekers. But in reality, to call this a digital employment service is far too generous, because instead of providing any personalised assistance, the platform is simply a compliance management tool for people to acquit their mutual obligations and access their employment fund. Now, of course, some people do find a job while in Workforce Australia Online, But often that's because they've found a job on their own, not because of the limited support that's actually available to them. And that lack of individualised support means we see too many people languishing in the online caseload for the maximum 12 months before an automatic referral to a provider. For many people, that could be a wasted year with no real progress towards employment, making it harder for them to get a job. Whereas other participants in the online system are seeking out provider-led services that are more intensive than they actually need because there's so little support actually available to them in the digital platform. This one-size-fits-all approach across Workforce Australia is letting too many people in the caseload fall through the cracks and failing to support them into a job. But even where people are being placed into work, the incentive structure for providers often means there is not enough regard as to whether the job is suitable, which often leads to poor job fit. And poor job fit often leads to poor outcomes for the participant and for the employer. Around 1 in 6 people who have exited Workforce Australia end up re-entering the system within a year. This carries personal costs for the individual, increasing the risk of disengagement and more likely to remain on income support. It also carries a productivity cost to our economy when someone is placed into an unsuitable job where they can't make a meaningful contribution. And there's a financial cost to the Commonwealth to continually fund placements that fail. Of course, suitable employment must be the goal for every participant, but the timeframe and pathway for getting there will be different for each individual based on their barriers to employment and their distance from the labour market. The failure of the one-size-fits-all approach to meet the diverse needs of job seekers has been evident for some time. And in response, successive governments have introduced a range of complementary programs to plug some of these gaps and provide support to specific groups of job seekers. However, most of these programs are operating in silos rather than being integrated into the core employment services system, which leads to gaps and duplication and, of course, inefficiencies. The outcome of this one-size-fits-all, whether it's parking in the system or pushing people into unsuitable jobs, is compounded by the standardised approach to mutual obligations. Now, mutual obligations are an important and long-standing feature of employment services, designed to encourage participants to maintain engagement in the job search process. Our government supports mutual obligations, which reflect the community's expectation that if you can work and are receiving income support, you should be taking active steps to obtain work. However, mutual obligations need to be fair, proportionate and, above all, effective in order to facilitate people into a job. For too long, the public debate has been stuck in a conversation about whether mutual obligations are too hard or too soft, when the real question should be, are mutual obligations actually helping someone into work? Unfortunately, all too often, the answer is clearly no. I hear from job seekers and employment service providers that many mutual obligations are meaningless, a grab bag of busy activities that simply do not lead to a job. The generic one-size-fits-all approach to payments and placements doesn't just deliver poor outcomes for participants, but it is affecting employers too. Employment service providers cannot connect people to jobs without employers. But too many employers say it's too difficult to engage with the employment services system. They are frustrated at being sent unsuitable candidates because providers don't always take the time to understand the needs of local businesses or be responsive to what's happening in the local labour market. And as a result, many have simply just walked away. So it's clear that the one-size-fits-all settings that underpin Workforce Australia mean it is simply not equipped to support all job seekers across the caseload at different distances from the labour market get into work. And it's not delivering the best possible outcomes for participants, for employers or for our economy. Which is why today I'm announcing that the Albanese Labor government is embarking on the biggest reform in employment services in over 30 years. This is a major positive step for the over 1 million Australians who access this system each year by ensuring that they get the right support at the right time. And we will deliver improved value for money by ensuring that resources are directed to where they need to go the most. The reforms I'm announcing today comprise of 4 major changes with further consultation to inform some of the design detail under this framework. The first and most important change is that we are ending the one-size-fits-all approach to servicing. In place, we will be creating 3 distinct high-quality service streams offering different intensity of supports depending on an individual's distance from the labour market, and which will better integrate complementary programs to provide more cohesive support. The second change is the introduction of effective mutual obligations that reflect an individual's distance from the labour market and are actually designed to help people get a suitable job. Third, we are overhauling the assessment and triaging process so that barriers to employment are identified early and job seekers are matched with the right supports from day one. And fourth, we are introducing a new way for providers and participants to set employment goals and clearly identify the steps needed to achieve these, along with ways to overcome barriers to work. Now, our government is committed to delivering an employment services system that is focused on what matters most, helping people into work. A system that delivers high quality, effective and universally accessible support with the capacity for continuous improvement. Now, as I've outlined, the current system struggles to cater to people at different distances from the labour market. And that's why we are taking what effectively is a single service offering for the whole Workforce Australia caseload and creating 3 distinct service streams to better prepare and place job seekers into work. Each service stream will have a different service offering, a different approach to mutual obligations for participants and a different funding model for providers to reflect the varying intensity of supports that a participant needs. Now, Service Stream 1 will be a new digital service for people who are digitally literate and close to the labour market. As I've outlined, the current Workforce Australia online platform is really only a compliance and administration tool that people use to acquit their mutual obligations. So in this budget, we have delivered $205 million to create an actual digital employment service that will provide participants with individualised resources, training and career mapping. And where necessary, job seekers will also have access to brief interventions and targeted support through a national contact centre. This digital service system will still have the capacity to support people acquit their mutual obligations. But these mutual obligations will be designed to help a person achieve employment with focus on vocational activities like job searches. Compared to what's currently available, Service Stream 1 will be truly effective and an efficient way to support participants who require less intensive supports. To test ways we can provide complementary online services, our government has also provided $5.9 million in this budget to Future Women to trial a virtual advisory service specifically for parents to help them move back into work. Now, Service Stream 2 will deliver high-quality, targeted provider services for people who are not digitally literate or need more support than what the online service can provide. There will be a clear expectation that providers will support participants to set individual employment goals and map out meaningful steps to achieve them. Supports under this service stream will focus on what we know works to get people into jobs, like active job coaching, work-ready supports and training linked to in-demand jobs. But these supports will also need to work for the participant by being clearly connected to their employment goals and to the jobs available in where they live. Similarly, mutual obligations will also need to be explicitly connected to a participant's employment goals, with flexibility to adjust as someone moves closer to the labour market. Now, Service Stream 3 will deliver intensive services for people who are furthest from the labour market. We know many people in this service stream won't have a linear path into work. So this service stream will provide more time, more flexibility and more support to build the confidence and capability. It will include alternative pathways to employment, including through social enterprises. And participants will have more options to work towards their employment goals, like mentoring, work experience and volunteering. Payments to providers will recognise these longer pathways to employment and strengthen post-placement support for better employer engagement. And providers in this service stream will be distinct from those in Service Stream 2, chosen for their deep community connections and relevant experience in delivering intensive supports. The mutual obligation requirements in the Service Stream 3 will focus on meaningful engagement and building someone's readiness to work. In this budget, we've delivered $52 million for early targeted delivery of Stream 3 services over the next year so that we are ready to roll them out nationally. These three distinct service streams will fundamentally reshape our employment services system. And I'd like to stress this point. They go beyond anything attempted by any other government in a very long time. Because even if we look back to Job Active under the Abbott government, which did use streams to categorise job seekers by need, we saw the same problems as we see now in Workforce Australia. A one-size-fits-all approach that used the same set of provider incentives across the whole caseload and a standardised approach to mutual obligations. But under our new system, there'll be different intensity of supports, different provider incentives and different mutual obligation requirements, all directly connected to helping job seekers achieve sustainable, meaningful employment. Now, of course, to make the employment services system work as effectively as possible, people should be connected with the right supports from the moment they enter the system. But too often, the current assessment process is failing to deliver this basic function. At the moment, the system solely relies on the job seeker classification instrument, which produces a numerical score to determine the likelihood of a person leaving income support within 12 months. There is no ability in the assessment process to determine how far someone is from the labour market and identify the specific barriers they have to employment. But if you're going to help someone get into a job, these are fundamental things that you should know about them. So as part of the budget investment in reform, we've committed $27 million to develop a brand new assessment process. This new assessment process will be much more holistic to make sure someone's barriers and their distance from the labour market are clearly identified and understood. This will ensure people are referred into the correct service stream to get the right support from day one, potentially reducing the time that they spend out of the labour market. We will also be introducing a formal reassessment process, so supports remain appropriate for people as their circumstances change. The information gathered in the new assessment process will then be used to develop a tailored employment goal plan for each participant. This plan will outline a person's employment goals and the steps to achieve them. it will replace the current job plan, which usually reflects a standardised template that is often filled with arbitrary activities rather than outlining genuine steps to help someone get a job. These new employment goal plans will bring together activities, supports and mutual obligations that recognise an individual's barriers to employment and will give every participant in every service stream a clear pathway to work. Now, today I've outlined the reform direction for our employment services system, and our government has invested in this budget $312 million to establish key elements of the new system. However, I recognise there is a lot more design detail underneath this overarching framework that will need to be carefully worked through. And that is why today I'm launching a public discussion paper to seek input on that design detail, which is now available on my department's website, and I'd encourage people to engage in that. To ensure that participants' experience is central to the design of the new system, expressions of interest are open today for a new user lived experience panel. And to provide technical advice to government on the design of the new system, I have established an Employment Services Reform Advisory Group. Now, to ensure we have enough time required to design and implement the new national system, I'm also announcing today that all current Workforce Australia contracts will be extended by 16 months as we work through the final design details. Now, I cannot understate the big job in front of us. This is major, complex reform, but it will be worth it to realise the benefit of employment services system to make sure it's functioning for the job seekers that need it. Because every single participant, no matter how far they are from the labour market, deserves a system that provides a clear pathway to employment and can address their individual needs. A system that can deliver many more stories like Jason, and a system that helps more Australians into jobs so that they can share in the benefits and dignity of work. Thank you.
Minister, thank you. There is a bit to get through there, and I think most people in the room, as you are, would be aware that it is a sitting week. We have a good number of media colleagues here, so we will get to questions from them very shortly. Before we go to individual elements of the new system you outlined today, I wanted to begin with a very broad question of design, because, as you outlined, the current system is based on a market of third-party providers, which in fact has become quite concentrated in recent years. I think by ACOS analysis, the number of providers in that market is only just above 40 at present. If the market is failing and the services are of poor quality, why are you sticking with that fundamental design? Why not consider, or did you in fact consider, bringing back a full government-run free employment service?
Well, firstly, I would say that our employment services, whichever stream you're in, will be free. And I would acknowledge that we have seen through Stream 1 investment in the Australian Public Service. So Stream 1 and the digital offering will be really important and will be delivered by the Australian Public Service. But what I'm focused on in this new system and making sure the incentives are right underneath this system is delivering high quality services, and we need the people that can do that best delivering that.
So those providers aren't up to scratch for that tier?
Well, what I'm saying is that we need to get the incentives right first in how we pay providers. But secondly, we want to see the best people doing the job. I'm not going to guess who those people are now, but I would point out that when we're talking about the very complex job seekers, we know that employment service providers will have to work with them to address non-vocational barriers as well as vocational barriers. And that includes mental health services, that includes domestic and family violence services, potentially homelessness services. The Commonwealth doesn't run those services, and so what I'm saying when it comes to employment services, we need high quality, we need those that are deeply embedded and can deliver what is going to be a different service offering to the one we currently have.
All right, I've got much more I'd love to ask, but I won't. I'll yield to the colleagues, and Rosie Lewis is here from The Australian.
Minister Rishworth, can you provide a bit of a breakdown as to how many people you expect to fit into each stream? You must have done some modelling, i.e. are we going to have more people under the first stream with less support than those who require more support? And under this more flexible mutual obligation system, won't it require more bureaucracy and intervention and potentially end up costing taxpayers more dollars?
Look, I'll deal with your first question first. We still have design work and modelling to go about how many people will be directed into different streams. But I would say already we've got one in five sitting in unemployment for more than 5 years. So there's an obvious percentage of the current Workforce Australia caseload that will need to be looked at how we divert them. But secondly, when it comes to mutual obligations, the mutual obligations have to be meaningful. And I believe that if mutual obligations are more meaningful to the participant, then you will get more people engaging in those activities. But secondly, what you're really talking about is not mutual obligation, you're talking about compliance. And that is something that will be in the system. There will be compliance in the system. But where that compliance is used, we will be working through. And I'll give you an example. In Inclusive Employment Australia, as we designed that system, compliance was first and foremost. That now has been changed to be a last resort. So I don't believe that people are going into the system and deliberately looking out of how not to engage and contribute, but we need to make those mutual obligations meaningful to actually getting a job. And at the moment, too many are not helping people get a job.
Ron Meisen is from the Australian Financial Review.
Thank you, Minister. A question on behalf of my colleague, David Marin-Guzman. The current system already includes a loading to get long-term unemployed into the job market, and you've highlighted how service providers effectively ignore that and focus on the easy wins. How can you flesh out how these streams, particularly Stream 3, what kind of level of incentive on top of the easy wins can be achieved to refocus the efforts there? And can you provide a real-world example of how you see that happening?
Yeah, look, that is a really good question. That is still detailed design that we're working through. But just as an example, at the moment, individual participants get top up in funding, both in service fees and outcome fees in the current system. We want to fund organisations differently to deliver this service in recognition. We'll be designing how we get those payments correct, but it will not just be a top up of the current system that currently exists. It will be a different funding model to make sure we're getting the outcomes we want.
Thank you.
From the ABC, Holly Tregenza.
Thanks for your speech, Minister. You spoke there about the new assessment process. What specific criteria or technology will be used in that new assessment process that will, I guess, replace the current job seeker method, and will it use AI?
Look, thanks for that question. I mean, this is designed and will be designed as a personalised assessment process. At the moment, I indicated there's one instrument that is used. There will be a number of other instruments and assessments used to understand. We are going to work to make sure that it is inviting for participants. They're encouraged to disclose, because at the moment, some participants do not disclose. They don't feel comfortable. So we want to make sure that the assessment process is trauma-informed. So I haven't worked out, and neither has the department, every element of that assessment process, but by definition of making it more personalised, more streamlined, and more approachable in its presentation, then it will have humans involved.
Right, I hope I'm not stealing the thunder of Zach, who's about to ask the next question, but I will just slip in another one on mutual obligations, Minister. They take many forms. Work for the dole is but one of them. There's also a minimum number of monthly applications for a job. Will both of those continue? Will that minimum number continue to be 4? Will they be centrally reported and recorded?
So, as I outlined in my speech, the type of mutual obligations will differ depending on how far someone is from the labour market. So if you are close to the labour market, then putting in job applications in jobs that you're interested in and that are in your goal plan are clearly an appropriate activity. If you are very far from the labour market and do not have work-ready skills, there is no point in that participant putting in endless applications before they have got those work-ready skills. So we need to actually stop thinking of this one-size-fits-all approach to mutual obligations and recognise that mutual obligations will be different depending how far someone is from the labour market and what steps they need to take. So the type of examples you've said will vary across the different service streams and will vary depending on someone's individual goal plan, which is critically important.
Okay, so no hard and fast quota of applications for each and every individual?
Across the whole caseload, the mutual obligations will look different. It may be for some people that job search and putting in applications is the step in their journey that they are ready for, and that is part of their mutual obligations. For others, it might be getting skills they need to actually participate in work. For others, it might be attending, for example, paid work experience or participating in a social enterprise. It needs to be much more individualised and much more appropriate for what will actually help that person get a job.
All right, ready at the mic on the floor is Zach De Silva from AAP.
Thanks, Greg, and you've segued nicely into my question.
Perfect.
On mutual obligations, there have been a number of legal questions around the stripping of payments from people who may not have met their mutual obligations, including, I think, 2 reports from the Ombudsman. Under your changes, are you confident that you will address those legal questions?
Well, that's a great question because I'm not waiting for the new system to deal with those legal questions. We are dealing with those legal questions right now. So my department has accepted all the recommendations from the Ombudsman review and are implementing changes. We put funding in the previous MyEFO to actually fund more humans, for example, in the decision-making process. So as we move forward, we are fixing some of those concerns that exist in the current system. But when it comes to compliance into the future, we will be continuing to work through when that applies. But of course, compliance will be part of the new system.
Thank you.
As much as that compliance has been described as punitive and harmful under the present design, the Special House Committee that looked into this and reported in late 2023 also noted that over a 12-month period of job active, while the number of people who committed mutual obligations failures, I think is the term, was relatively high, above 50%. Only 1% or less than 1% of participants actually had their payments reduced. So is it actually as punitive as generally described?
Well, I think one of the challenges is making sure it's not necessarily the compliance that's the problem, although we do have to fix that. It's what activities people are undertaking. I mean, the biggest complaint that I get from job seekers is particularly that the mutual obligations they're engaging with don't help them get a job. They're not linked to where they want to go to and the job they want to get, and may not be linked to actually jobs in their local area. So for me, it's fundamentally how do we get the settings around mutual obligations correct so they're effective, and then we will look at compliance after that and how that applies. And as I said, it's not just about the settings in compliance, but it's also about when we use compliance, and that is all being consulted through as we go through this redesign process.
Thanks, Minister. Let's go to Amelie Saunders from the Nine Network.
Thanks, Minister, for your speech. Your government just handed down a budget that was focused on intergenerational equality. You've got a bunch of students now heading into their university studies who could be looking at a very different job market on the other side because of AI. How do you go about ensuring support for them so they can keep long-term employment? And does a system like this have the tools it needs in a market where roles are increasingly being replaced by AI?
Look, thanks for that question, because it does go to the broader impact of AI across the workforce. One of the key reasons we want to make sure people get the right support at the right time is to prepare for if there is any disruption in the labour market for whatever reason going forward. So making sure we have an effective, efficient employment services system is so critical. Your question goes though to how are we preparing people within the system for support around AI, and that is a really important question, and I think thinking about how AI skills really need to be considered a foundational skill going into the future. So there's a question about how we best prepare people in workforce or the new employment services system, but also how we disseminate that economy-wide. And of course, there's been a lot of conversations, businesses, along with unions, along with a whole range of different organisations, TAFEs, training, universities, schools, are all contemplating the question of how do we prepare people and students into the future to use AI. I would say that Jobs and Skills Australia particularly have said it's much more likely that AI will augment jobs rather than replace them in the medium term. So that even focuses our mind in a greater way about how we make sure people have the skills so that they are able to augment their job and be competitive when they're applying for jobs.
Thank you.
Just going back to the question of cost and budget, which I think you indicated to Rosie Lewis at the outset, Minister, that more work goes into this, but is it anticipated that apart from the $312 million you plugged into this month's budget, the general $2 billion figure, all of this can be restructured within that existing funding envelope?
Well, I don't want to preempt the design of the system, but it's our expectation that we can reorganise this system in a more effective way, which allows us to move resources to where they're needed most. And I think, for me, my focus is in how we get the most effective service system. Obviously, there'll be investment up front, but in an ongoing way, we want to have the most effective service system. And what the current system's not doing is focusing on those that need the intensive service, and at times potentially over-servicing people that don't need that intensity of support. So we believe that significant reform can happen without adding huge dollars to the system.
Okay, our next question comes from David Allen of Innovation Oz.
Thank you for your address, Minister. Going back to your response to Zach's question before about the oversight of mutual obligations compliance. Now, for those watching along at home, that is a largely, or has been a largely automated system in the past called the Targeted Compliance Framework. And ACOS, as recently as last month, said it believed thousands of decisions made under that system were questionable. You just now said more people had been hired to oversee that compliance system. Has automation been removed from the Targeted Compliance Framework?
Firstly, I would say in terms of the compliance framework, the government in my EFO has been very focused on how it complies with the law, and that includes funding for more human decision makers. Of course, the government is working on automated decision making and a framework across the whole of government. That work has been undertaken by the Attorney General and will apply to the work done in my department as it will across. To suggest there will be be no automation is just incorrect. There will be, but where it materially affects people, we are looking at how we make sure there is more human decision makers in place at the moment, and that is also the consideration of the government's whole of government framework.
Given how badly TCF went, though, are you concerned or are you confident in your department's ability to roll out what is clearly going to be a very sophisticated digital framework, given how that went?
Well, look, I absolutely have confidence that we can achieve this as a government. There is no doubt that this is complex reform. I said that at the end of my speech. This is not easy reform, it's complex reform, but I'm absolutely committed to getting it done. I'm absolutely committed to get the settings right and making sure that we can deliver this, because we have an obligation to all of those job seekers that deserve a fit-for-purpose system.
Thank you.
All right, we'll bring on the next journalist question. Alexandra Jones is with us from SBS, and I will just indicate to colleagues we're tracking okay for time, so if anyone has follow-ups or second round questions, please give some thought to that. Alexandra Jones.
Minister Rishworth, Alexandra Jones, SBS World News. Long-term unemployment and reliance on JobSeeker has risen over the past decade from 15% to 20%. Under these changes you've announced, how many more people on JobSeeker currently has your modelling estimated to find long-term employment? And also, how will it address specific skills gaps in the labour market?
Look, thank you for that question. I would say that the job seeker as a proportion of population has been relatively stable, but we have seen, as I outlined, too many people stuck in the employment services system and stuck receiving income support. And we need to make sure that we've got a service that actually supports them. So this is all about, your question goes to all about the reforms that we are delivering. How do we actually get support for people? And when we look at that Stream 3 service, we recognise it needs to be a much more holistic support. It needs to support people with their vocational barriers, which does include skills gaps at times, low educational attainment. But there's also non-vocational barriers that people have to address as well. And so it will take some time. But we need a concerted effort to support those people, build their confidence, because when I speak to people that have had the opportunity for work, that have for the first time got their full-time job out of a long period of unemployment, the impact is profound. So many job seekers or now employed people that had been job seekers have shared their stories. So the redesign of this system is to make sure that those long-term job seekers are not parked and put in a too hard basket, that we're actually saying we are up to supporting them getting to meaningful jobs. Now, what that pathway will look like, what those barriers will look like, will be different for different people. There might be a skills gap. I mean, when I speak to older people, they talk about age discrimination. So we need to look at how we address these different issues. They will be different for everyone, and that's why the Employment Goal Plan, along with a better calibrated intensity of service and appropriate mutual obligations, are the key levers to actually ensure that that occurs.
Just a follow-up question, if I can. Reasons that some may fail to satisfy their mutual obligations or, remain in long-term unemployment have been, noted as mental health, illness, injury, drug and alcohol dependence and homelessness, to name a few. Will your new system include any measures to address these underlying causes of unemployment, any interactions with other social services?
Look, I think it's a really important question to recognise that a person needs to be seen holistically, and so there will be other barriers that are non-vocational barriers identified. I don't envisage the employment service system being wholly responsible for addressing those barriers. Of course, that is why our Stream 3 providers will have to demonstrate a deep connection to community so that they can connect and support people that may have certain barriers to, at the same time as addressing their vocational barriers, be supported to address their non-vocational barriers. I think that's really critical, and perhaps, being through government services traditionally have been very siloed, and so it is acknowledging the connection of that. And that's why in the Stream 3 service, the mutual obligations will look very different to those in Stream 1, because we recognise that if you're in Stream 3, you do have different barriers that the service, along with other services, will support people to address.
A fellow director of the National Press Club, Gemma Daly, is up next.
Thanks, Minister. I'm also representing Australian Industry Group, which is about 60,000 employers who you know well. I don't imagine it would have been easy to get a $300 million spend across the line this budget. And so justification of this simplification, which we welcome in terms of the employers, what is this change actually going to mean in terms of any forecasts around how many more people in the workforce, or happening more quickly, like it'll be 6 months instead of 18 months or something? I'm just wondering if you've done some work on that.
There hasn't been, we haven't done specific modelling on the exact numbers, but certainly the design, and we'll work through the detail of this design, is we are hoping that this will make sure people are able to get the right service at the right time, which means they won't have to move through different services at different times or get into a job that's unsuitable and recycle back. So we think that this absolutely has the potential to ensure that people that have been excluded from the labour market get the opportunity to participate. Now, we know that unemployment in this country is still low, and we also know that, of course, that a lot of employers are still calling out for employees. We're hoping that this service, and we're certainly are determined to deliver a service that will make sure that people that have been not deemed suitable by employers before are job ready, are supported and can enter into the labour market.
Thanks.
Before we go back to Rosie Lewis and possibly, if time permits, Holly Tregenza, we do have a question that's been fed in by a member or guest, Minister, and I'll convey it to you. Elon Musk, the soon-to-be trillionaire, has estimated that 15% of the workforce could be wiped out by AI, and as a consequence, he's mounting an argument, I presume at least in the United States, that there be a universal wage to supplement that bombshell development across the workforce. Is that something your department has modelled for at all? Either the universal wage side or, if you like, the 15% catastrophe?
I mean, forgive me if I don't take all my policy advice from Elon Musk. He has had many positions on many things. But what I would say about AI and jobs and the impact on jobs, our department is doing work, and we will be releasing work done very shortly. Looking at a snapshot in time about the impact that AI is having on on our labour market. I mean, it is very reassuring. I've seen some early work. It's being tested and retested about the impact that that's having. We are not seeing quite the disruption that's been predicted. But of course, we've got to continue to monitor that. I've also recently visited the Centre for Decent Work that does a lot of interaction around technology, and of course they predict that there will be a lot of new jobs that will be created. Jobs and Skills Australia, of course, also has indicated, as I said already, their prediction in the medium term is a lot more augmentation. So I'm not going to stand here and predict what the future will hold in terms of AI. What I would say, though, is our responsibility across the board, and this is employers, governments, organisations, is to make sure that we are skilling our people and ensuring that they have the skills to augment their jobs. And what I've said in another speech recently is what we don't want to see is just employers saying, well, you don't have the skills, we're just going to disregard you. What we need to do is have a national effort to make sure that we're upskilling workers so that we can get the advantage, the productivity advantage that comes from AI.
Okay, let's loop back to Rosie Lewis.
Just sticking on AI, the Fair Work Commission says it's being swamped by claims, and a lot of these are being generated by artificial intelligence, which is distracting them from their major reviews. Will the Albanese government take any concrete steps to assist the tribunal as these claims are flooding it?
We really recognise that the Fair Work Commission does an enormous amount of work, and we have increased their funding to do that work. The Fair Work Commission has raised, of course, both publicly and across the board, concerns with some of the interactions around AI and some other issues. I take those issues really seriously, and I'll be working, as I have, across the board with employers and unions to see what, if anything, we can do to support the Commission do its important work.
Do you have any initial ideas at this stage?
Look, we're working through different ideas. We have, under legislation, we have some great tripartite institutions. We've been actually working through those. We had the Fair Work Commission present to our tripartite group, and we'll continue to work through what can be done to support the Commission do its important work.
And I think time will permit Holly Tregenza just to slip in one last question.
Thanks very much. Last month you had a forum, you brought together unions and employers and government, and you spoke about AI at work. I'm wondering what specific commitments or concrete actions came out of that meeting, and given how fast AI development is moving, how workers will actually notice the difference in the next 12 months from the outcome of those meetings.
Well, firstly, I would say what was really consistent across the board was how important a role we all have in supporting the Australian community, including workers, on the question of trust. Now, this is a really important question because, as I've said, workers are, and I think the broader Australian community is anxious about AI, and we need to ensure that we are working together to demonstrate and elevate trust as a really critical part of this discussion. This group will continue to work together. It was its first meeting and of course was discussing a range of issues, but there was a lot of goodwill in the room on how we can work together to ensure that AI can be adopted in a way that enhances productivity, but that doesn't leave workers behind and feeling that distrust.
Holly, thank you. And just one final question that I admit, Minister, is only tangentially related to our discussion here today, because I did have cause in preparation to go back to that House Select Committee report from late 2023. And although you weren't the Minister at the time, my eye was drawn towards recommendation 7, and that is that the government create a permanent administrative traineeship position for disadvantaged job seekers in the electorate office of all members of the Parliament. And these placements could go between 9 and 18 months. So the question is, have you done that? Would you do that?
Look, I think giving young people that haven't had their first job an opportunity to get their foothold into the labour market or into a job like that. There is no specific training course to be an electorate officer. I have to say, you need a lot of skills, and so I've been really lucky in my electorate office that we've been able to employ young people in their first full-time job, and they've been provided, I think in some instances with some people that come through the door, a really steep learning curve of how to support people and assist people. But I don't think it's a formal traineeship, but they've certainly will tell me that they've learned a lot and they've really developed. So I've been really lucky to find some younger people. It's been their first full-time opportunity, and I tell you, they've really thrived. As I have employed older participants as well, because there's nothing more calming in electorate office than having someone with that experience that can really show empathy for people coming through the door.
I'm sure that anyone who's seen the inner workings of the Parliament and electorate offices would fully appreciate how scary some of the issues are that you have to deal with and how diverse. Well, Minister, thanks so much for outlining your agenda. I note that a lot of it has to be implemented around the time that the next election is due. So you'll have your handful and you have a question time to attend to.
I do.
Here's your complimentary membership of the National Press Club.
Thank you. Thanks very much.